Hey everybody, how you doing? What's going on, everybody? I had this playing in the background. That's why. Hey everybody, I'm Danny Thompson. I'm on the Dev Ecosystems team at Google, and I am so excited to be able to hang out with everybody today. Honestly, I'm really excited about this show in particular. We have Chris Sells, who is on the Flutter team at Google, and we're going to be talking a lot about. He actually wrote a very extensive article, if you haven't seen it, on Medium about all the new features that are listed in Flutter 2.5, and we'll be talking to him today. He is a product manager on the Flutter developer team, as well as a very in-depth knowledge on everything that we're going to be discussing today. We are also joined with Faisal Abid. Faisal Abid is an entrepreneur who is also utilizing his technology and skills as a Google developer expert in the areas of Flutter, machine learning, cloud, and AI, and Kubernetes as well, and many more other subjects. So super excited to be joined with everybody today. One thing, if you can, share this on Twitter. Go ahead, tweet out the link, share the YouTube video. I guarantee you a lot of people get a lot of value out of this. And you can always sign up for any future Between the Brackets episode at the link on the screen right here, goo.google / Between the Brackets. And that way you'll never miss a future episode again. We have some huge things in store for everybody. If you can, real fast in the chat, can you drop in the chat, number one, what are something that you're currently working on? And number two, if you have any questions for the speakers that we have today, we're going to be doing a live Q&A as well to try and make sure that we have anything that you're interested in covered today. So without further ado, I would love to introduce Chris Sells from the Flutter developer team, as well as Faisal Abid, Google developer expert. Thank you both for hanging out with me today.
Sure, thanks for having me.
I'm honestly super excited about this because I've been diving in, especially you wrote an incredible article as far as I'm concerned with the all the nuances of Flutter 2.5. And I was wondering if you can, obviously we're going to dig into a lot of it today, but what has been some of like the really interesting aspects of Flutter 2.5 from your perspective?
So I think the biggest thing about Flutter 2.5 has been the performance improvements. We really spent. I mean, quality is always job one on the Flutter team for sure. I mean, we with each stable release, and we do about one a quarter. I spend a bunch of time highlighting, new features, new capabilities, making sure that Flutter developers know about the new things that they can do in their Flutter apps, and that includes updated releases for Android and iOS for the most recent operating system, or exposing new capabilities that we hadn't exposed before. It includes new platforms like in March when we released web support in stable. We're working on desktop operating system support, bringing that to stable. It includes all those kinds of things, as well as tooling updates and the kind of anything that the developer is likely to be interested in. But in spite of all of that, our number one job is not new features in Flutter, but rather the continued stability, robustness, performance improvements, fixing issues, making sure that when a Flutter developer sits down, no matter what platform they're targeting, that they have a robust experience, and that they are able to provide native performance as well as beautiful apps to their end users.
For sure. So I know there's been a lot that's included in 2.5, and I kind of want to unpack several things. And so much has been included with the update in 2.5. One of item being templates and the Flutter lens. So what is the idea behind adding it, and what has been your experience even using it?
So you've asked about two separate things, two new features in Flutter 2.5. However, both of them get to the same kind of heart, which is as Flutter matures over time, and we released a big release in March of this year, which is Flutter 2.0, which included things like null safety and bringing web to stable. The 2.0 marker also represented a big step forward in stability and maturity. And as things mature and we learn, the right way to build Flutter apps, we try to encode more and more of that into our tooling. So the two features you mentioned in Flutter 2.5 both of them get to the heart of that, which is what are some best practices that we can share with Flutter developers? They're always asking us. I mean, Flutter is pretty great in the sense that it doesn't impose a specific architecture. I mean, Flutter itself is declarative and composable and reactive, and so that definitely has implications in terms of the architecture that you use to build your user experience. But when it comes to things like model view controller or model view model, or you have to keep your state here or treat it that way, or do your navigation this way or that, we don't impose those restrictions. And in fact, the community over time has come up with a number of different ways to solve these various core architectural problems that Flutter supports equally well. But we do have a lot of people saying, hey, I'm new to Flutter, or, gosh, I've been using Flutter for a while. I'm not sure if I'm using it correctly. And so, we try to encode the best practices into the tools in a number of ways. One of those ways is lints, Flutter lints. The Flutter lint project actually has a number of things in it. One is, out of the box, when you first create a Flutter app before the 2.5 release, you were kind of working without a net. There was no lints out of the box for you at all. Yeah. And it turns out that this made it really nice for new developers getting used to Dart and Flutter, because they could just start writing their code and it would work for them, and they'd have hot reload and everything would be nice and easy and hunky-dory. But as the community has matured, they wanted to be a little bit more locked down. They wanted to be a little bit more tighter on their typing and other kinds of best practices. And so for the first time in Flutter 2.5, we bundle a set of what we think are the recommended set of lints into the new project. When you say, I want a new project in Flutter, and that's what Flutter lints represents. And Flutter lints itself is reliant on the underlying Dart lints, which are all of the Dart things that have none of the Flutter specifics that you get when you say, I want a new Dart project, right? Maybe it's a command line project, maybe it's a package. And so for the first time, you get one out of the box for Flutter, and you get the same set of lints. Essentially, the Flutter lints are a superset of the Dart lints. So this is a big step forward for folks. These are things that we recommend. Now, so we also, it is just a subset of the lints, the ones that we think provide the most value without getting in people's way. I personally, as a Flutter developer, I like to, I don't get to write much code in my day job, but evenings and weekends, my hobby is writing Flutter code. I'm a little embarrassed to admit, but I tend to turn on a lot more lints than comes out of the box with Flutter lint, but that's okay. You can easily do that if that's what you want. But the nice thing about Flutter lints is it gets you started down that the right path. Now, the next thing that we did was a brand new template. It's not the default template. It's there. It's an optional template, but it's meant to be the one that comes out of the box, the counter app, is great from a, hey, let's teach you Dart and Flutter and a bunch of the basic concepts. And we spent a bunch of time going over it and over it, trying to pack as much as we could into a single file. But real world Flutter apps aren't a single file. They aren't even a single folder, right? We tend to, over time, when you take, state management into account, when you take navigation between multiple pages into account, when you take separations of concern into account, you tend to get something that looks a little different. And the counter app wasn't a great step in that direction. You kind of have to, not quite start over, but you have to build out that infrastructure, the rest of that infrastructure in terms of the files and folders and how, a way to arrange things. That's all on you. And again, Flutter allows that, and lots of people over time have figured out how they like to arrange things. And you can refactor over time to get more and more kind of regimented as you go, which is nice. I like that when I'm writing my own Flutter code. But the idea of that skeleton template, which is the brand new one, is it has a way of arranging, separating concerns, handling multi-page navigation, etc. It's still evolving. I wouldn't consider it done. I think there are things we can do to improve it, but it is kind of the first step down this road of kind of recommended best practices from an architecture point of view that is new to the Flutter team. We haven't done this before.
And what's very interesting about that is, as I do a lot of Flutter consulting, and if you were to ask, a year ago when companies, larger enterprises came to me, they would have one of their senior engineers play around with Flutter, and they would see that counter app, and they wouldn't see a lot of guidance from the Flutter team, and they would see that as a signal that Flutter is not ready for enterprise or mature enough. But from 2.0, specifically 2.5 now with this new sample app, in fact, just 2 weeks ago, I had a call with the company, and they said, yeah, we started playing with the skeleton app, and we understand how this works. We like lint. We like all these features. And that's because it gives them confidence that I'm not having to learn best practices. The best practices are being given to me. And then, yes, as the developing team evolves, the team itself gets its own best practices. But Flutter is also telling them that, hey, this is how you typically do things in Flutter. And this is kind of like a parallel to what happened with Android, where back in like Android 1.0 to probably 1.5, it was just kind of a Wild West. And then as Android 2 and 2.5 came out, the Android team started setting a lot of guidelines and frameworks. And then, that's when more and more enterprises became more comfortable adopting Android as their mobile first strategy.
Yeah, and that's true with any technology. Front end and right. I mean, as the community matures, best practices emerge. The Flutter team, I think, and this all started before I joined, did a really good job of not kind of tightening the screws prematurely, right? Saying, hey, this you have to do things a certain way because it's Flutter, right? And how Flutter works in general. But beyond that, they made very few mandates, which allowed the community to kind of mature on its own as they figured out best practices. And I'm sure, Faisal, you have a set of things that I would have never thought of when it comes to writing Flutter code. I write Flutter code for fun, small to medium sized projects, but I don't do it 40 hours a week. I'm sure you have lots of things you'd like to see in a template and reflected as best practices that I would have never thought of, or the Flutter team itself would never know.
Totally.
And really, it's the community for any technology that ultimately sets best practices, not generally the vendor. They're always kind of trailing in terms of taking those best practices that they hear from the community and trying to help provide guide rails over time as technology matures.
Agreed.
Yeah, this is one thing I think about Flutter in particular that, number one, I genuinely appreciate. They listen to the feedback. They listen to the community. They, of course, with all the contributions, it's something that's top of mind as well from others. And which kind of leads me into my next question, which is one highly requested feature, especially from Android developers, has been making fully making full screen possible. That is now possible with the new release. And are there things developers should be aware of to fully take advantage of this? How should they properly use system UI mode to make sure that they're fully capable and taking advantage of everything that this new feature has to offer?
So just to be clear, this release, supports a number of new capabilities in Android, and you pull out one of them, right? The new support for underlying different kinds of full screen modes. And the Flutter team itself doesn't provide guidance in terms of best practices there. That's the Android team does that. They have their own set of UI guidelines. If you want to build an app that works well in Android, you should use these capabilities, and here's how to use them, and here's when to use them. What we on the Flutter team do is do our best to take these capabilities from the underlying platform and expose them to Flutter developers. Flutter itself is not, Flutter is a multi-platform technology, right? The idea is that you write code, and we try to make it so that you can share as much as possible of that code between multiple platforms. But we don't do it in a way that is like least common denominator, right? We know from 20 years as an industry try to build these multi-platform toolkits that is a strategy that doesn't work. Instead, what we do is we allow you to write the code and share as much as possible, but always that you get to the underlying capabilities of the platform. And we have a number of ways of doing that with platform channels and foreign function interface, and being able to know what platform you're on and do different things based on that. We have a number of techniques to do that, and we always let people write that code if they want, which means that not 100% of the code is going to be multi-platform, but if we can get 90, 95, 98%, and we hear from our customers on a pretty regular basis, that's generally what they're able to achieve. Now, of course, there's always cases where you want to be deeply linked in this platform or that platform, and you'll have to write more platform-specific code. And there's even cases where Flutter is the wrong solution altogether, and you're writing so much platform-specific code, you should just write an app using the underlying native SDK. But it's our job as Flutter developers to allow you to share as much code as possible between platforms while still allowing you full access to the APIs from the underlying platform. And I think we try to walk that line pretty well. Anyway, we try.
Well,
I think you're succeeding.
Oh yeah, one of the things with this release is, I remember going through it, is I think 1.0 of Pigeon, which is a way to generate these platform APIs. And this is an issue that I had probably in the 1.6 Flutter days, where I was writing a lot of platform code for a client, and it was annoying to having to go back and creating a template for Swift, and then another template for Kotlin, and writing those platform codes. And as I was going through the release notes, Pigeon lets you just annotate, this is my host API, and it will generate the Android and iOS code for you. So that is a big win. And like Chris said, if you're writing a lot of platform-specific code, maybe Flutter's not the right answer, but when you do end up writing platform-specific code, Pigeon will help a lot.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited about that Pigeon release, actually. That's pretty great to be able to just say, hey, here's the API I would like to call. If you could just build all the infrastructure goo to send the parameters back and forth, and then I can go and write my type-safe Dart code in my Flutter app. I can go write my type-safe Swift code. I can go write my type-safe Kotlin code. And somebody else is handling the messaging back and forth. That feels to me a much more robust solution. At the same time, letting me focus on the actual code I actually care about writing. I think a Pigeon is a win-win there.
Yeah, I mean that's the basic premise of why Flutter is so popular, which is you don't have to worry about a lot of things that you typically had to do when you were worrying about multi-platform apps or even writing an Android app or iOS app. You just need to worry about your business logic and how your UI looks. Everything else, Flutter's handling it.
Absolutely.
Thank you for saying that. Certainly, that's our goal.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this kind of leads into the next question. So we had several students actually submit some questions and recordings. And so I'd like to play the first one from our student, Chloe, that submitted a question.
Hello, I'm Chloe Bell, and this is Lead for the GDSC University of Toronto St. George campus, and my question today is how ads can be targeted to users. Thank you.
So we do know that Google Ads is now stable, and so I guess how can we better utilize that?
Yeah, so this is a really big deal, right? I mean, being able to monetize your app, and this isn't the only way to monetize, right? We also have in-app purchases, which unlock a number of monetization strategies. But the goal with bringing ads was how do we enable all of the kinds of things that people want with ads, and that includes I want a banner or someplace on my screen that the ad just owns. I want to have ads that scroll along, or move around with the rest of my content. I want ads that kind of I'm able to theme and make it look, like a native part of my app. I want the ability to be able to, customize and control the ads, which this ad stable does. At the same time, we have to do it in a way that doesn't expose users or app developers or Google itself to fraud. Right, click fraud, is a thing that we care deeply about, and so, we've actually been working with the ads team on this solution for kind of a long time, more than a year, to be able to expose the functionality while still, protecting everyone in the chain from fraud. Now, in terms of how to, target specific ads to your specific users, there's APIs that allow you to, specify context and profile information and allow the underlying ad network to pick ads that are appropriate to your users, and then assuming you're successful in doing that, they click on the ads, clicks equals money, etc. The good thing happens.
Yeah, I was on the beta for this as it was being developed, and there was, early on in the beta, there was very little freedom, but as the beta got more mature and the final release, there's everything that the current Google AdWords SDK supports, your Flutter app supports. So you should have no problem in monetizing your app. In fact, what's really nice about this is because as long as you follow the Google Ads policies, the Flutter banner, the Google Ads banner is just a Flutter widget, right? So because the Flutter is so flexible, you can take widgets and do all sorts of crazy fun stuff with them. You can do whatever you want with these banners as long as you fit the policy rules. So it's a fantastic question. I think, by letting Flutter have full Google Ads support, I think developers can make a lot more money.
So we have a question from the chat that I want to bring up here, and it's from Taras Petros, and he's saying, what's the next big hurdle for the Flutter team to overcome?
Actually, I'm very curious what Faisal has to say about that. What do you think is our biggest hurdle?
So I think the biggest hurdle is probably not even related to Flutter Mobile, but Flutter Web. A lot of clients come to me and they say, well, we hear that Flutter is awesome and you can build mobile apps with it. And I keep seeing Flutter Web. Can you build my e-commerce app and then also just make it expand to web? And Flutter Web is getting there. It's not full production ready, at least in my opinion. I'd like to hear your opinion, Chris. But so when I tell clients that, they feel that, okay, well, Flutter's kind of promising this one platform, but I'm still not able to go out and build this complicated web app. So I think as performance on Flutter Web increases and gets better, I think that's probably the big hurdle that probably the Flutter team has to go, jump across.
Certainly, we hear folks asking for more when it comes to web. When we built this initial version, and it is a 1.0, and it is production ready for the kinds of apps that we targeted it. We didn't target it at the entire web. The web does a lot of different things. What we targeted it at was, rich interactive apps. The kind of thing, think of it more as, hey, I'd build an app for the desktop, I'd build an app for a mobile device, and I want to then publish that, use the web as a delivery vehicle, as opposed to, I want to build a content-rich website, right, where search is important, and selecting flowy text with mixed media and things like that. Those are the kinds of things that we don't target with the initial version of Flutter Web. I hope that we will over time, but we're not there yet. And I take your feedback, right? For example, we get people asking all the time for things like, hey, how do we do SEO? And the way I think about it is, if you're building an app, right? You typically have, hey, I've got some, a landing page that describes, the benefits of this cool thing I got, and it says customer testimonials and provides videos and blah blah blah. That you need SEO for. That you need to be flowy content. That is an excellent use of a web toolkit like Angular, for example.
Yep.
Whereas as soon as you say log in, bang, you're behind the login wall. There's no SEO. There's, you're now in rich application land. That's all your data that's not publicly available on the web, etc. That's the right place for your Flutter app, and that's how I tend to think about it.
Yep.
And my evenings and weekends, right, when I'm building apps, that's typically what I do, right? I split the two kinds of content in that way. Now, does that mean we will never provide SEO? Does it mean we will never? I mean, we certainly want the performance to improve. We want the scrolling to feel more natural, but at the same time, Flutter is for building apps specifically. And that's the kind of thing that we want to continue to do. But if you look at, so 3 years ago when I joined the Flutter team, my very first week on the Flutter team, December 2018, was in London at the 1.0 release at Flutter Live. I was sitting in the audience. And that was an amazing show to be able to see this brand new thing. And at the time, we had only production release for Android and iOS, and we had aspirations, and we showed off some cool demos for what eventually became Flutter Web, Flutter Desktop. So, but even if I just focus on kind of the 1.0 of Android and iOS and see how those have grown and matured over the last 3 years, you could make the same arguments that we're making now about Flutter Web, about Android and iOS 3 years ago.
For sure.
That was in our initial public release, scoped down to a smaller problem set. And then as time went on, we handled more and more scenarios and more of what you can do on mobile, until now, 3 years later. Flutter is enormously capable in those spaces, I think. And it covers many more use cases, and it's a lot more applicable. I see that's where Flutter Web is today, and over the next 3 years, I think we'll be stunned at how much more capable it gets. And then, once we get just to be clear, once we get Windows, Mac OS, Linux stable out the door, that'll be a 1.02, and we'll need to grow it over time as well. I mean, that's just the nature of kind of where we are in the product lifecycle for these various platforms for Flutter.
And what's nice is the way I pitch Flutter Web is, and a lot of clients have done this already, is they use the Flutter Web version of the Flutter app as a preview / trial of the main app. And so we'll have clients telling their customers, go to xyz.com, check out the app, and then if you want like push notifications and other native features, then just hit install, and then you can download the app. And so the clients get the same experience. They get to create their account. And for the customer, it's just like, wow, this is just one app.
Yeah, that is, of course, the power and beauty of Flutter, right? I mean, but before cross-platform toolkits, you really had to say, oh, I want to write an Android app, I want to write a web app, I want to write a Windows app. Now you can say, I'm going to write a Flutter app, and then I can think about, I'm not quite sure what platforms I'm going to, target over time. I know I'm going to start with X, Y, and Z to begin, but over time, because I'm building it in Flutter, I can expand the set of base, the targets that I'm going after, right? Being able to, press install from a web app where you have instant access, no install, and then being able to press install and get the native desktop version added to your computer that has maximum integration as you point out, and native performance according to what's available on your desktop versus what's available in your browser. I mean, that's pretty powerful to be able to choose and expand your targets over time during the lifetime of your app.
For sure.
Absolutely. And so this kind of comes into one area. We talked about improvements in performance. What are some things that you could kind of share and highlight with performance improvements with 2.5?
So sure. So let's see. So I've actually brought the blog post up in front of me to refresh myself. Of course, one of the things that PMs have to do, we don't even get to live in the present. We're mostly living in the future, right?
Absolutely.
We think about releases 3 to 6 months. I've already started for I/O planning. We don't even know for sure when Google I/O is going to be. And I'm already starting on I/O planning, just to be clear. So I brought up the blog post to refresh myself. So we continue to work on the iOS shader warmup. For those that are unfamiliar, the basic issue is as we move to Metal, we lost some of the APIs available out of the box, or some of the behaviors available out of the box with OpenGL and shader caching. Provided by the system. Metal does things differently. And so essentially, we got to a place where, and a shader is, just a program that you hand to the GPU, right? Just for folks wondering what the hell a shader is. And so the idea is when you're doing, fancy animations or, graphics or textures or whatever, mostly it shows up in animations. The operating system itself, the first time it runs it, compiles that program, and then for the life of that app, then that can be kept. And so the first time you run that animation, it looks like there's jank because frames are dropped because you're waiting for the compilation to happen, etc. So we have continued to improve the experience there by being able to do things like enable pre-compilation of your your shaders at app startup, do things fancy in the background, those kinds of things. This is a step onto an experience where we really want, which is we'll just do the right thing and you don't have to worry about it. We're not there yet. We haven't quite figured out how to implement that in the way we want, where you get the same ease of use and the performance with using the new Metal API in iOS. And by the way, that iOS shader is only one source of jank, drop frames, stutters, etc. And we continue, and it's not just iOS. Every platform has considerations here, and we're continuing to make improvements with each new release. The iOS shader. We also did some work with Async Tasks and being able to improve the priorities of the messages we handle. So, for example, we have a message loop on every UI thread, or every isolate has a message loop that handles, hey, we did something asynchronously. Now we have the results back and we can continue. Before 2.5, we would just take the next one off the list and go right on it. Now we optimize for the UI kinds of things, right? So that, the response you get back from the network might have to wait 16 milliseconds while we handle, an animation. And then we'll get to it after the animation is done, that kind of thing. So we do priorities. That's something we added, and we continue to add those kind of performance improvements over time. So that was a big part of what we did in Flutter 2.5, and we're continuing to work on the tooling as well. So, for example, in Flutter Dev Tools, which is our Flutter debugger, if there are shader compilation problems where you are dropping frames and you are chewing up your animation or your rendering in Shader Warmup, you can actually see that in the timeline so that you can go, oh, that's a problem. I was, the animation was paused. I now know that I can go and work to do some pre-compilation and warm up in the background and et cetera to avoid that for the user in the future. So what we try to do is not only make the underlying system always better, always faster, new capabilities, but also expose those in our debugging tools so that you can find them and we can help you notice when you have to take advantage of these features, all working together kind of in an end-to-end developer experience for the Flutter developer.
I also want to add one thing, which is a lot of times I see that specifically, I mean, I'm speaking from like the consulting world. I see clients and other developers get hung up on this iOS jank issue. And it's funny because I don't think they've actually gone through it and like built an app and seen it. It's a problem, but it's not a problem that is a blocker that your app looks garbage. It is so rarely seen, especially with all the apps that I've built for customers. Not a single customer has brought up an iOS jank issue. Almost all the bugs are developer created bugs, not Flutter created bugs. So a lot of this is optimizing for the best, but Flutter's already very, very good.
Thank you again for saying that. These are the kinds of things that I don't get to say, right? For sure, we try to be the best we can, and we always try to improve as well. A friend of mine always likes to say, the biggest room in the world is the room for improvement.
That is very accurate. I like that statement. I may actually copy that for a future talk.
Feel free.
Yeah.
I think at this point,
I'm going to see that as a tweet. Danny, I know you're going to tweet that soon.
Probably. I may have to give some credit there. So you mentioned one thing that I've been interested about, and I've actually been reading a lot about. By the way, if you're watching this and you haven't read Chris Sell's Medium article, highly recommend it. It was extremely informative and really well done. Very detailed. It gave me some really subtle nuances about items that I weren't really thinking about. And you kind of mentioned one being the debugging tool and the improvements in that debugging tool. Can you talk a little bit about how some of the advancements that have been made there and maybe how it can help the developer experience a little bit as well?
So Danny, I don't know if you know this, but I write that same blog post 4 times a year.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, every time we have, so it was 3 years ago when, the Flutter 1.0 release, a little bit of history for you, you didn't ask for. The 1.0 release didn't have any kind of, a what's new, right, for beta users, kind of in the API from a capabilities point of view. And we noticed that and we were like, well, we should really tell people what's new. And so, the next release after that, I think it was the 1.2 release, we started, this little kind of, hey, we dug through the PRs and, here are the new ones and here's some interesting ones you might think of. And every single time we've done one of these stable releases, now we do kind of this blog post that goes along with it, kind of highlighting what's new. And we used to just start with, here's the list of PRs, let me just highlight some of them. Now the list of PRs is in the thousands every single release, and we can't possibly, we do publish a file that lists all the PRs that have been merged, but I don't think any human could get any value from it. Instead, we write these blog posts, and it's. I happen to be one pulling together, but it's a team effort, right? Engineers from all over the Flutter team and DevRel and PM all contribute, and so that's why probably the best stuff isn't even stuff I wrote. It just comes from the rest of the team. So anyway, tooling is always part of the highlights. I mentioned the highlighting of the shader compilation that you might want to fix. There's also filters when you're doing performance or memory profiling, where you can turn off things and say, I don't really care about the underlying performance of the Flutter engine. I'm going to assume that's doing great. I want to focus on, what about the code I wrote. right? Or the memory I allocated, what did I leak, right? Because I assume, Flutter's not leaking memory gratuitously, and hopefully that's true. Being able to just filter those kinds of things out of DevTools and just let me focus on my own code is pretty great. And then there are some, we're always adding features to the tooling too that, aren't necessarily performance related. But the goal, as the Flutter community matures and people are building larger and larger apps, right? The GPay app, when they ported it to Flutter, it was over 1 million lines of code. When you have apps of those size, and GPay is one we can point to because it's our source code. I can tell you how big it is. But I know I talk to our top partners and customers all the time. I know that more and more people are building these bigger and bigger apps with Flutter, and as that happens, naturally, even small memory problems become big memory problems. Even small performance problems become big performance problems as you magnify it over a code base like that. We have to move the tools forward, right? And so, adding support for how do you optimize your app size, how do you track down memory leaks, how do you track down performance problems, how do you track down specific kinds of performance problems, whether it's you're calculating the 10,000 digits of pi in this function, or you've got shader jank, or except you're using images that are too big for the space that you're showing them in. All of those kinds of things, those are just examples of the kinds of things in the last 12 months that we've dropped into our Flutter Dev Tools, and we're constantly taking feedback, improving our tools, and rolling them out because we have to. Because Flutter apps are getting bigger and bigger, and the developer base is getting bigger and bigger, and people need better and better tools to be able to keep up with those big code bases.
So one thing we've kind of mentioned, and a huge attraction to Flutter, is like its cross-platform capabilities, and also the fact that it can make websites. Can we talk about what is being done in this area to make it more stable? And also bringing up this question from Fortis, is there any roadmap or timeline to when it will be more stable for desktop?
So I'm confused. Are we talking about web or desktop?
I would say web, but we can follow up with desktop afterwards.
Okay, so again, I'm confused. So desktop is two things. Desktop is a form factor. How big is the screen? Whether you have, mouse and keyboard input. And it's also a set of platforms. One very popular desktop platform is the web, right? You run your code in a browser, in Safari, in Firefox, in Edge, in Chrome, on various desktop operating systems. That's, we call that Flutter Web, although Flutter Web also supports mobile, of course. We also have a number of native targets for desktop. You can build a native Windows executable, a native Mac executable, a native Linux executable. That is what we call Flutter Desktop. So with those definitions in mind, I'm not sure what question you're asking.
All right.
I think it's desktop. I think it's native.
Yes.
Mac or Windows.
Okay, so I think that then the question is, when are we bringing Windows, Mac OS, and Linux to stable? Is that the question?
Correct.
And the answer is we have not announced that yet. But I can tell you we're working hard on it. At this point, we're to the place where, for example, I'll give you an example of the kinds of things we're working on to bring it to stable. One is we did, as we moved to desktop operating systems, it became more and more important to have larger and larger areas of text entry, right? The kind of thing you would do on a mobile app where you didn't, enter, one little line of text or maybe a couple of lines of text doesn't cut it on desktop. When it comes to desktop, you need, multiple pages. You need, the command keys on the Mac are different from, what they are on Windows, and they're different from Linux. And you need them, when you're editing text, copy and paste to all work the way you expect. And all of that needs to work because now you've got keyboard and mouse input. So then we're also kind of, as we route these text messages to the various parts of the widget hierarchy, you need to be able to say not just here's some text, but are you handling this? Should I send this to somebody else? And if you don't have that kind of thing, then multiple widgets are all looking at the same keystrokes, and they're all being activated by those same keystrokes, as opposed to the one furthest down the tree. Things like and so being able to cancel a keystroke, being able to handle tabs between widgets properly, all of those kinds of things we did over the last 6 months. We did a big refactor of the entire way that we handle both text and text editing, to be able to support these kinds of scenarios. And we have successfully landed that. But with any big re-architecture, there's regressions, so we're dealing with that. We want to make sure that we've handled those regressions before we ship anything that we would call stable. We also have to make sure that we are supporting internationalization properly in any stable release. So, for example, making IME work, the international text input kinds of things for various languages around the world on various operating systems, Windows, Mac, and Linux, making sure that works well. Being able to support accessibility well, and integrate with the various screen readers and various accessibility tools built into these different operating systems. Making sure that when you have accessibility information in your app, that that it gets integrated properly. All of those things are important for us to be able to consider something stable. Those are the kinds of things we're working on right now. We already have people that don't need those features that have started with the current beta for Windows, Mac OS, and Linux already shipping in the Microsoft Store, in the Apple Store, for Mac OS, in the Linux Snap Store. People are already, and they have been for months, shipping what they consider production level apps for Flutter Desktop on these various operating systems. But we're not quite ready to call it stable. So those are the kinds of things we're working on. I hope to bring it to stable soon, but we have not yet announced a date.
Cool.
Awesome. And so up next, we have a question submitted from Rohan. So Rohan, let's go.
Hello, Chris. I'm Rohan from Louisiana State University. I hope you're doing well. I have a question for you regarding Flutter's desktop support. Now, we all know Flutter for Desktop would be an exceptional UI toolkit for building for desktop. However, I wanted to know what sort of native functionality we as developers be able to use. So, like what sort of Windows, Mac, or Linux platform APIs would we be able to leverage in our programs? Thank you.
Hey, Rohan, nice to see you again. I recognize Rohan. That's a good question. So whenever you're, writing a Flutter app on, a specific platform, there's always questions about capabilities that you'll have access to. A lot of it, we're just going to do out of the box for you. You write your code in Flutter and you say you want a Windows executable, we'll give you a Windows executable. You say you want a Mac executable, we'll just give you one. We'll just handle that for you. You are running your desktop app on the Mac, and so Command C works when you're editing the text instead of on Windows where it's Control C, right? We'll handle that for you automatically. You've got content that is beyond the size of its container. We'll automatically give you a scroll bar on desktop because that's the way most desktop apps work. So a lot of that we'll just handle. Some things that the community is building that you might be interested in. There is at least one package out there for the Fluent UI design language. So if you want your Windows app to look like a Windows app, you can absolutely make that happen. There's also another one for the Mac OS design language. It's close to, but not the same as the Cupertino design language. So if you'd like to use that in your app, you absolutely can. And likewise for Linux, there's one for specifically the Ubuntu design language that you can drop into your app as well. All of those are available. There's also some really cool, out of the box, the title bar on a Flutter desktop app isn't especially useful. It just, shows the title. Modern desktop apps kind of take over that title bar and start drawing custom things into it. For example, I'm looking at Chrome right now, and Chrome puts, a list of tabs, right? The tab UI actually goes into the title bar of an app. And so there are some great plugins for, hey, I want to take over the title bar while still having, the functionality. I want to minimize, I want to maximize, I want to close my window, I want to drag it around, but I also want to draw in there, right? So there's capabilities like that. There's an increasing number of plugins to support desktop. So for example, if you wanted to do, video playback or audio or Bluetooth or, those are either available or under development for you to take advantage of as you move into the desktop world. Of course, the kinds of plugins that the Flutter team itself is building, we're working on support for desktop as well. For example, the common dialogues. I want to open up a file. Well, you get a specific dialog on Windows that does that, and that works. A different dialog on Mac OS, et cetera. So, and likewise for file save and opening folders and things like that. So we are, the Flutter team itself is doing a bunch of integration with the underlying desktop, and then the community has even taken it one step further and is doing a bunch of work to make desktop look and feel exactly like what you want on the desktop. So lots of exciting things going on in desktop.
And that's one of the nice things, because by default, because of Flutter's plugin architecture, you're going to get all features. Like if there's one feature that a Mac supports that Flutter's not going to build, you can just build a plugin for it. So that's what I'm very excited about, where I'm able to just build these native experiences on desktop and take advantage of everything Mac OS has to offer.
Love that. And we actually have another student submitted question from Renee. So let's go ahead and play that.
Hi, Chris. My name is Renee from North Seattle College. My question concerns deep linking. One of the user experiences I've had that is frustrating is when I'm deferred to install an application. So I click on something on the internet, usually with an intention that sends me to an application. I install the application, and then I open up the application, and it's like the home screen of the app where I have to log in and do all these things. And sometimes my original intention to get into that application just completely gets lost. I feel confused, and the whole point of the journey is kind of derailed. So I'm wondering if Flutter has the ability to retain the user's original intention. Thanks for your time.
That was a fantastic question, and unfortunately, I have a very disappointing answer, which is, by the time somebody, whether it's Android or iOS, by the time somebody has to, they have a deep link that refers to an app that hasn't yet been installed, and then that app is installed, it's up to the operating system itself to be able to say, I remember that deep link, and now I'm going to give it to this newly installed app. That is not something, unfortunately, the app itself can do. If the operating system passes it along, then the app can do the right thing, and certainly Flutter apps can do the right thing, even for a brand newly installed app. However, it's up to the operating system to pass that along. So the thing that I always do as a user is, if I end up in the, oh darn, I have to install the app again first, is that I go back to the web page has the original link on it, and then I click it again, and then it launches the app with the deep link, and then I have the experience I want. I wish I had a better answer for you. That is not, unfortunately, something that Flutter can fix. But once Flutter does get the link, magic can happen.
It works.
Yeah.
Awesome. And so we know state management is kind of a big topic, and I was wondering if you could suggest some best practices or things that developers can keep in mind when utilizing state management techniques.
Yeah, so state management is funny. This is something that, the term we've agreed on in the industry for the same problem we have throughout UI toolkits, no matter what, if they're web, if they're desktop, if they're mobile, if they're whatever they are. We tend to lump it into this thing called state management, which is this highfalutin phrase, which really means I have some data that I need in this widget here, and over here in this widget, and maybe in some other widget at some point in the future. I don't want these widgets to know about each other, but I want them to have access to shared data. And when that data changes, I want the widgets to be able to be notified so that they can rebuild themselves. That's what state management is. I have data I like to share between more than one widget. Now, Flutter itself provides the core atoms on how to solve this problem, which is two things. One, I want to be able to find this data wherever it is, which generally means that I want to walk up my widget tree and find some widget that knows that can hand me this shared data, whatever it is. So that widget A can say, I want, the login info, and widget B can say, I want the login info. And the widget tree can say, here you go, here's the login info. And my widgets don't have to know where that is or care. And we use something called inherited widget network, which is a core atom that allows you to say, here's some stuff that I put in the widget tree, and you can grab it. And then the second thing is being able to say, oh, this particular data has changed, and there's a couple of ways, and then please rebuild my widget based on that. There's a couple of ways to handle that, but the core way is via something called a listenable. And a listenable is just a way for an object to say, hey, I've had an update in my data. I've had something changed in my data, and I'll just notify a set of subscribers, and then they can do whatever they want to with that information. And generally, what they do is if it's Flutter, the build method is called again, and then you rebuild your widget based on whatever the new version of the state is. And that's how we handle things. And those are the core ideas of state management. Now, in terms of how you write the code, I would not recommend using inherited widget directly. It's kind of a pain.
Mm-hmm.
Listenable, I wouldn't use directly either. I'd use something called change notify, which manages all the subscribers for you. And you just, when your data and your object changes, you have one line of code that says, just let everyone know, called notify listeners. When it comes to the actual, how do you get to the data? There are a number of state management solutions. The kind of easiest thing that, if you don't have any real reason to pick something else, we recommend a package called Provider. The Provider provides a lovely API wrapper around inherited widget that does the right thing and makes it super, super easy to handle the various kinds of scenarios. But it imposes no architecture.
Mm-hmm.
If you would like your state management solution to also impose architecture, which some people do, right? They like to think of it as, I've got a big team. I really wish, somebody tell me how to arrange my code. There is something called Block, and Block is something that we do use internally at Google. It helps arrange your code, and what it does is it helps you do separation of concerns. Right, so you've got some data over here, and there's a mandate that it can only handle these kinds of operations, and you've got some UI over here, and it's not allowed to step on the blah blah blah. Right, it just provides a prescriptive architecture. That's the kind of thing you like. You can do that. There's solutions like MobX, which help reduce the boilerplate code when it comes to every time something changes, I have to call notify listeners, and it does code gen to do that kind of thing. There's a number, and I'm just scratching the surface. There's
so many.
There must be a couple of dozen of these various kinds of state management solutions on Flutter, and I encourage you to kind of take a look at them based on your needs. Some of them are nice and simple and scale really nicely without architecture. Some provide architecture, some provide some productivity savings if you're willing to do some complexity when it comes to generating code. All things being equal, I recommend Provider, and that's what I most often use.
Yeah, and to add to that, if you're getting started in Flutter, don't worry about this right now. Try to learn the concepts first. If you start, if you go on Pub and find like getX or something, or MobX, you're going to get stuck in the details of the framework, of the package, and not Flutter. So a lot of beginners make the mistake of, hey, I've heard this is good, I'm going to install it, and then they get confused because they don't understand how Flutter truly works. So start from the bottom and then layer up.
I like that.
Absolutely.
Yep.
So we have a question submitted here. This will probably be the last question we address. I know we've talked a lot about all the things that Flutter 2.5 can do, but what if somebody's brand new to Flutter? It seems like we've had a couple people pop into this live stream today that have never written Flutter code before. So what would be a way that you would suggest learning Flutter? Is there a course provided, or maybe something on Coursera? What would be your preferred method that you talk about?
It is interesting when Flutter was newer and I would get this question, I would be able to point to, there is this one course that I really like, and I still like it. It's by App Brewery, and it's like a 25-hour online course. It's a little long in the tooth. It doesn't, for example, doesn't support null safety because it was recorded a few years ago, but the core ideas are still the same. I still like it. But now these days, every video learning venue has multiple Flutter courses. Mm-hmm. So you won't have any trouble, going to your favorite Coursera or App Brewery or Pluralsight or wherever you go, YouTube, right? That you won't have any trouble finding, how do I get started in Flutter kinds of courses. One of the things that we have been recently doing on the Flutter team itself is doing kind of a Flutter book club with a recent book that we really like called Flutter Apprentice, which kind of helps you kind of build up an app over the course of the book, and it teaches you the core concepts as you go. And what we've been doing as a team, the DevRel team on Flutter, has been kind of writing the code and taking users through the code in a video format. Right. So, hey, let's talk about, we just learned about state management. And here's the code we wrote for state management. Let me take you through it and show you it in action. It's a really useful way to chunk up various chapters of the book and kind of focus on each one, and kind of the video that goes along with the book itself. And it helps for folks with different kinds of learning styles. That's what I recommend right now. But honestly, there's a lot to choose from.
Yeah, there's a lot. And one key thing is don't just rely on the videos or the book. Just practice a lot while developing the apps. Like even the Flutter documentation is really good. The best way I've always learned is go to the documentation, and specifically Flutter's documentation, because there's so much sampled code. And because of Dartpad, you can just try it right there. You don't have to install VS Code and all that stuff. So you can learn it that way, and then use the courses and the book as a complementary to kind of solidify those concepts.
Yep, and we actually also shared in the chat Rohan, who submitted one of the questions. He's a college student, and he's teaching Flutter at his local Google Developer Student Club chapter, and he has like an intro to Flutter series that he's recorded as content for the students that kind of go to those events, and that's definitely something that I'd advise you even to check out if that's something you're interested in.
Yeah, I can't recommend that one only because he was silly enough to include me in the Q&A section at the end. So I'm sure you're tired of me by now.
Honestly, you've been absolutely incredible, Chris. Thank you so much for doing this, by the way. I know you have a very busy schedule. So the fact that you're able to come share all this great information with all of us has been fantastic. and you've been honestly a pleasure to listen to. I've been taking notes on the side, so it definitely got some new things to be looking at myself. And I also want to say a special thank you as well, Faisal. Thank you so much for even jumping in here. I know it was kind of short notice, and you've added so much content and context to a lot of situations that I think this discussion really came together with your input. So thank you for being here as well. I've had an amazing time. If all of you enjoyed this talk as well, please share it on social media, tweet it out, LinkedIn, Facebook, wherever you decide to kind of share this. I guarantee you this Flutter content will help a lot of developers in the industry, and especially if they're new to 2.5, this would be a great fresher and great contextual information as well to have them add more quality to a lot of the things that they're doing. I had a great time hanging out with all of y'all. Thank you so much for being here. And that was this month's episode of Between the Brackets. If you haven't already, please fill out the feedback survey. It lets us know how we're doing, but it also kind of gives us an idea of things that you want to see in the future as well. We want to make sure that we're bringing great, valuable technical content to help you in your journey. So if we can get some more specific feedback, we'll make sure future episodes also include that. And if you haven't already, please go to google.com/betweenthebrackets and you'll be able to sign up for all future episodes and you'll never miss another episode again. If you haven't already subscribed to the YouTube channel, drop a like, drop a comment, and all the other good stuff for the algorithm to bless this video a little bit, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for having me.
Bye, everybody.